In this video, I'm going to teach you how to remake Roddy Rich's The Box instrumental that sounds like this. And I'm also going to teach you how to use the sound palette that we've put together to remake that beat to create something original, something that could sound like this. All right, you ready? Let's go.
delicatebeats.com.
All right, so the first step I took when recreating this beat was to recreate the sample. At the very beginning of the instrumental and throughout the song, you can hear these strings and horns playing, and I knew for a fact it was a sample because I had heard it in another song by Sierra called Love, Sex, Magic, in which Justin Timberlake uses the exact same sound. I think it's the exact same pitch. But for this remake, I wanted to challenge myself and actually recreate the sample. So whenever you're doing that, or whenever you're recreating something, the first step is always to know the name of the instruments you hear in the beat. So in this case, I knew there were some orchestral strings, there were some horns, and you can faintly hear in the background some timpanis. So the first step I took was to find the right strings run sample, and I knew because I had just downloaded some orchestral strings off of Splice, and I had a feeling that there were some runs in there. And as you can see right here, I have the sample that I've used, and if we look at the detuning right here, I'm transposing it up 3 semitones. So that's the first step. Whenever you're using samples, you want to make sure that you have the ability to change the tempo and the pitch handily. And that is actually one of the biggest reasons why I moved a few years ago from Logic to Ableton, so that I'm able to just drag and drop some samples in the arrange window and very quickly change the tempo and the pitch. If you don't have Ableton Live, you can always use a sampler such as Contact or whatever Fruity Loops has these days. But let's listen to the original sample. And then by listening to Roddy Rich's beat, I was able to tell that it was 3 semitones higher, like this. All right. The next step was to arrange it the same way the producer has done it in the instrumental. So if we look closer here, you will see that I'm actually not using all of the run at the beginning. He's using a shorter run sample in his beat, and then he's looping portions of the trail end of the sample, and I've done my best. But it's not, you know, a seamless loop. I could have done a seamless loop, but I kind of liked the choppy feel, and because it's in the background, you don't really notice the fact that it's all choppy like this. So now we have this. Pretty good. Now let's move on to the timpanis. Timpanis are tuned orchestral percussions, and I knew I needed a similar run or roll that mimics the string run. So I came up with this sample. These are some samples that I've used in the past countless times, so I knew I had those. And in this case, it's moved down 3 semitones. Timpanis need to be tuned to the song. So if I had used the original, and let's just move it for the sake of the example, with the strings, you will see that it sounds awful if they're not properly tuned. You know, it just sounds off. But if we move it down 3 semitones, and I know that they're not perfectly lined up, but you get the idea. Now it's much more pleasing to the ear. And then I had a second sample because, as you've seen when I loop the string samples, I also needed some rolls that go along with this. And so I found this second loop. In the original, I think it's always 16th notes, but I felt like it was a bit too busy, so I changed it up a bit, and then we have this. And finally, the third and final sound for our recreated sample are some French horns. In this case, I've used a contact library. It's actually a freebie by ADO, and it's a great sounding library. It's the ADO Century Brass, and in their tri-pack they have these horns that sound pretty good, so I went with that. And so now we have this. On these horns, I'm just applying actually quite a bit of EQ, around 2K. I felt like the horns weren't as glaring as the ones in the sample, so I'm just using a little bit of EQ. And as far as mixing, I also have this RC20 plugin on the strings because, first of all, I needed something that sounded a bit more lo-fi, and there's also quite a bit of reverb on the original sample, so I've used this single plugin to do all of that. So by starting out with the VHS preset, I have a little bit of noise in there. So let's play the strings without the RC20. We have some tape wobble, some digital, which is not quite heard, but it's felt. Sometimes it'll degrade the samples just a bit. And then we have some reverb, quite a bit actually of reverb with a very short trail, just to give it that room. So with all of these little effects, we get this. So that was my foundation for the beat, and as you'll hear in the original, it plays throughout, but it's really just a background sound, something that plays the role of a texture really. So now let's move on to the chords. Next, I needed to get my keyboards right. So the first step I took was to create this patch with an electric piano. I'm using the Keyscape plugin, and it is this Wurlitzer 140B, the original, and it sounds something like. And as you can hear, it has a much more mellow tone than the sound that we hear in the beat. And so I've applied a few plugins to mix and get my sound right. So I've duplicated the preset that I had on the strings as far as the RC20, and then I have this EQ where I remove a lot of the low mids and add up a bit of some high mids, and now it sounds something like this. So a lot more vintage. And I knew there were 3 chords in there, so the first thing I did was to play the beat a few times, and I'm just trying to figure out the bass notes. That's how I come up with the chords, and I could tell that it was an A sharp, and then a D sharp, and finally a G sharp. So once you have those bass notes, it becomes very easy to build the chords around these root notes. So in the case of the A sharp, what you want to do is basically come up with a minor triad. So you're going to play the same note an octave higher, and to find this minor third, you're going to go up 3 semitones. So and finally, to have your triad, what you want to do is have the 5th, and in this case it's this F right here. So all in all, it sounds like this. But I knew that this high F right here wasn't there in the original beats, so instead what I did was what we call an inversion, and I took this F and threw it down right here, so it sounds like this now. Now let's build up the second chord. The second chord's root note is this D sharp. And so we're going to do the exact same thing where we're going to find the minor third. So 1, 2, 3. And then you go up 4 semitones to get the fifth. So we get the second chord is this. Okay. And finally on the G sharp we get so notice that it isn't a minor chord, it's a major chord in this case. So we have 4 semitones to go to the major third, and then 3 semitones to go up to the fifth. But again, I knew that this high D sharp wasn't in there, it was instead being played on the bottom. So let's recap. We have this first inverted chord right here. Then we have this. And now I'm going to stay on this D sharp right here instead of going high, and I'm going to play with my major third right here. So the chord progression goes like this. Very straightforward. So once I had the sound and I had the right processing on it and I had the right chords, what I did was to layer a second sound to get closer to the original. And in this case, I'm using this serum patch, and it's cymatics patch that's called a memory, and it has this really cool retro sound to it, and it sounds like this. And actually I think I played it an octave lower, so let's go ahead and just so as you can hear, there's some undertones in there that gets us much closer to the original. And if we look at what kind of processing we have on there, again, the same exact preset from the RC20 and just a little bit of LFO tool to get that nice little sidechain effect going. So now we have this for the chords. And finally, we have this little melody that's played by what would be the left hand. And if we look at the MIDI right here, what we see is that you're basically playing. Let me just. So it's basically deconstructing each of the chords. So on the first chord, we play the root note, the A sharp, and then we go up to the F, and then we go to C, go back to the A sharp, all right. So all of these three keyboard tracks together sound like this. So to top it all off, we have the drums and 808s. The drums are very straightforward, and to do the job I used my upcoming library. It's called Black Diamonds 2, and it is the sequel to our most popular trap kit for Contact, Black Diamonds. And so first of all, we have this clap right here. Just a short 808 clap, very tight sounding. And on there, To make it even more snappy, I actually rolled off a lot of the high end. This is a good trick on a lot of claps, especially electronic claps. You'll have these very, very shiny top ends above 10K. And so sometimes it's a good idea, especially if you're going to master it pretty loud, to remove some of that high end. So without it, it sounds like this. So it kind of boxes it in a bit more, controls the sound. Next we have the hi-hats, and the hi-hats are also played by an instance of black diamonds. And if we look at the MIDI information right here in red, you'll see that it's actually 2 loops playing from the black diamonds instrument. So very simple. And then we have the kick. If we look at the EQ again, I actually used the same exact EQ from my clap, and this is the pattern that plays in the beat. Oh, and we also have on the first beat an open hi-hat. So all of the drums combined together sound like this. And finally, for the 808s, I did not use black diamonds because in black diamonds, the 808s are very long. I wanted to give more control in terms of musicality. But for this upcoming contact kit that I'm working on called Invader, we have a wealth of very short DJ Mustard type basses, as well as very short 808s, stuff that you'll hear in records by like Juice WRLD or Smoke Perp, those very distorted short 808s. So I wanted to put this newer library to the test, and it sounds amazing. So with the 808, and by the way, the 808 usually will mostly be combined always with the kick, and so that's what happens. If we look at the MIDI right here, let me just pull up these tracks so we have a better view. You can see that all of the kicks and 808 hits line up, and what I've done here is really just play the root notes of my chords, and sometimes I will just go down an octave. I know that in the original, some of those lower octave 808s are actually played in reverse. I didn't do that because I wanted to put this video out as quick as possible, but basically what I would have done if I wanted to have those lower 808s in reverse would have been to resample my 808 tracks and just cut up these individual hits and reverse them. So it's pretty straightforward, but today I just wanted to get the feel right. So here's the drum beat with the 808. And you'll notice here that the whole instrument is pitched down by an octave. In the original, the producer probably had just one 808 hit, and that's why it sounds so distorted and really lo-fi. So I wanted to recreate some of that, and the way I found was to pitch down my samples quite a lot. An octave is a lot. So if we were to play the regular instrument, it sounds like this. So on the high notes, it almost sounds more like a synth, but you'll hear it here on the A sharp, the low A sharp, that it sounds distorted, but the rest doesn't sound distorted enough. So by moving it down an octave like so, I was able to achieve a much smoother and distorted sound. And if we look at the processing that I have going on this 808, again, to just have this grimier and smoother feel, I have again my trusted VHS preset on the RC20, and I also removed a lot of the high mids here on the 808. So if we go without any of the processing, it sounds like this. But it was too upfront, so with the effects, I feel like it blends much better with the rest of the beat. And so if we integrate all of these elements, and that's it, folks. That's how I remade the box beat by Roddy Rich. And now let's move on to how we can incorporate all of this sound palette and all of these elements and create a beat that's our own sound. So now that we've learned a bunch of stuff and we have this broad palette of sounds, we can go directly into production mode and create something original that sounds more like us, and basically take this newfound knowledge and apply it and benefit from it. So the first thing I did to create something different was to pitch down the orchestral samples and go back to their original pitch so that the samples would sound a bit cleaner. And I also changed the sequencing of the samples so that it would be a bit different. So now we ended up with this. The next step was to come up with an original chord progression. And since we moved down 3 semitones from our A sharp, we are now playing in the key of G minor. And I did the same exact thing to find my chords. I went and found this bass line, very, very simple. So G, G sharp, and D. And I constructed 3 chords around them. So you recognize this major chord from the previous chord progression. And finally, we ended up with this D major. So then I got some inversions going because I wanted to simplify the way I played this. So I went, and the first triad is not inverted, but I'm adding some melodic elements by playing the chords, the chord backward. This little fill right here before transitioning to the second chord. Again, nothing inverted, very, very simple. But then, so I don't have to go all the way down to D right here, what I'm doing is basically taking this D and moving it up an octave. So we end up with... So the chord progression goes... like so. Next, I wanted to use this a memory preset, but I wanted to have this little arpeggio type loop playing in the background to convey this air of mystery, something that would be more menacing. And so I came up with this. So I'm deconstructing kind of the chords. So we start on G. But then I'll play to add some tension this and just go up a semitone, and we end up on D. So it goes. And so now our keyboard parts sound like this. I think I'm hearing some clicks, so let me correct that real quick. All right, next up we have the drums, and the drums are basically the same aside from our kick, because before playing the kick I played this 808 melody or bass line, if you will, and I took advantage of the fact that I had lowered the whole sample group by an octave, and so I'm playing the same notes up an octave, down an octave, same, and then the second root note of the chord, down an octave, and finish with a different kind of groove right here. So it sounds like this. So with the drums, and basically what I did with the kick is I just added a kick hit on each of the 808 hits. So now our beat sounds like this. And then just for fun, I added this vocal line, which are some chopped up samples that come from, again, Black Diamonds 2, and they sound like this. And on the first beat, I added this tubular bell, again, to have the darkest, hardest kind of drum or beat I could get. And this is it, folks. This is how you can benefit from a beat remake and creating all of these cool sounds and integrating them into your own workflow. So thank you for watching the video. Again, my name is JT for delicatebeats.com, and I'll see you in the next one.